July 5, 1943. One of the fiercest and decisive battles of World War II has begun. The Battle of Kursk has been the largest armored confrontation in history, in which approximately 8,000 tanks participated. However, while this combat was taking place on the ground, above in the skies a huge air battle between Soviet and German aircraft was taking place. Although this aerial confrontation has been eclipsed by the land battle, its result, as we are going to see below, was totally decisive and marked the final fall of the Luftwaffe on the Eastern Front. So, and after this introduction, let's briefly put ourselves in context, and see why German aviation was so important and necessary in this battle. It all started with the Soviet offensives at the end of 1942, in which, in addition to encircling the 6th German Army in Stalingrad, they attacked the entire front line from Voronezh to the Caucasus. This made the situation for Germany critical, and it could only be saved by Manstein's counterattack in March 1943, which managed to stabilize the front and recapture Kharkov and Belgorod. The end result for the new front line was the formation of the Kursk salient, where all eyes were focused for the new summer offensive. Let us remember that it was either at the end of 1941 or 1942, the Germans lost a large part of their equipment during their defeats, and their industry had to make great efforts to replace the new planes, tanks, and artillery guns that were needed in the front. To prepare this confrontation, the efforts were abysmal, and the operation was delayed on several occasions so that the new material could reach the area. Approximately, the Germans had 780,000 troops compared to almost 2 million for the Soviet Union. They also had 2,900 tanks against the 5,000 of the Red Army, and finally, the German side had about 10,000 artillery pieces compared to 25,000 for the Soviets. This confrontation was going to take place in a fairly reduced space on the front, about 250 kilometers wide, which had nothing to do with the operations of previous years. The main German challenge was to overcome all the Soviet defensive lines and destroy the large armies they had assembled in the sector. And it is precisely at this point where aviation comes into play. Its main task, in addition to eliminating Soviet aviation so that it would not interrupt ground operations, was to serve as flying artillery in support of the infantry. This was precisely what had been done on a massive scale during the previous campaigns in both Poland and France. Those in charge of this task were the 6th Air Fleet in the north, with the 1st Flight Division, and the 4th Air Fleet in the south, with the 8th Air Corps. In total, to support the northern pincer, the 6th Air Fleet had around 640 operational aircraft. Some 500 of these aircraft were ground attack aircraft, mainly Stukas, and 140 Focke-Wulf 190s that would give them protection. While the 8th Air Corps in the south, it had about 1,200 planes, of which the majority were again ground support planes, and several hundred Bf 109s that would protect them from Soviet aviation. We have to remember that only 38% of the total aircraft that the Luftwaffe had were on the Eastern Front, the rest being in the Mediterranean and in Germany itself, which had already begun to suffer attacks from Allied bombers. Soviet aviation, for its part, also enjoyed superiority in terms of the number of its aircraft, and the 16th Air Army in the north, together with the 2nd Air Army in the south, added a total of 3,000 aircraft, being more or least half fighters, and the other half bombers and fighter bombers. In addition, near the Kursk salient they had other air fleets in reserve that could send about 1,000 more planes if needed, and they finally ended up intervening in the offensives that the Soviets launched in Ural and the Donetsk Basin. As we have already analyzed in the numerous programs we have on this battle, the Soviets managed to find out the date and time at which the Germans were going to start their attack, and just before that they got ahead of them. Although much has been made of his artillery fire on the German concentrations that were to participate in this operation, his air force also joined in this disarticulation attack. It was specifically during that early morning of July 5 when some 300 Soviet planes attacked 5 German airfields that were located in the vicinity of Kharkov, anticipating any German action. However, the Soviets did not start off on the right foot, as this air attack was detected by German radars, which quickly sent their fighters to intercept them. What happened next was a real massacre for the Soviets, who were caught completely off guard. Thus, the veteran German pilots, together with the ground units of anti-aircraft fire, inflicted the first defeat on the Soviet aircraft as dawn broke. Once the attack began on July 5, both north and south of Kursk, the Germans did not encounter much Soviet air opposition, so they came to consider that enemy aviation was not going to pose a danger during that operation. Everything would change a few hours later, when at sunset of that first day, all kinds of reports began to arrive about a strong presence of Soviet aviation in the area, which was attacking both ground and air German units. From this point on, the battle began to become more and more entangled, and the aerial battles were increasing in intensity. Virtually all German divisions began to request air support, either to destroy Soviet defenses or to protect them from enemy aircraft. This meant that the departure of the German aviators towards all kinds of objectives was continuous, and that there was not a minute for calm or pause. In just the first day, German airmen made a total of 4,800 sorties, while Soviet pilots made about 3,400. If we take into account that the Germans were more or less half, each German aviator began to accumulate a very high number of combat hours. Despite the effort made, and the large number of targets killed both on the ground and in the air, the German ground army had not made significant progress during this first day. In any case, the balance for the Luftwaffe on that first day was very positive. They had managed to destroy about 300 Soviet aircraft for about 60 aircraft lost. This first balance was favorable for Germany, but it was not something that they could maintain for a long time, since the fatigue and the difficulty to replace their men, as well as the material, played against them. Even so, Stalin was alarmed by this high number of casualties, before which General Rokossovsky tried to reassure him by telling him that the next day they would achieve air superiority. However, this promise could not be fulfilled, and on July 6 the losses of Soviet aviation again reached 200 aircraft compared to just 22 German ones. It was clear that the Germans had more experience in these great air combats, and they were able to demonstrate it during these first days. In their favor they had finally been able to concentrate on one point, instead of being scattered over thousands of kilometers in front. This made them able to fight almost on equal terms. In any case, the Germans were advancing at a very slow pace, and were hardly carrying out their plan, in which they intended to cut through the Soviet defenses in one swift maneuver. Thus, some German divisions could not be defended against these Soviet air attacks and suffered very high losses. Similarly, the Soviet tank brigades were also heavily attacked by German aviation, which came to cause real havoc among them in the southern sector of the Kursk salient. In fact, it was so much the case that there was even speculation about the use of a dirty bomb by the Germans. Due to the little progress that Walter Model was making in the northern pincer, on July 8 and 9, part of the planes of the 6th Air Fleet were transferred to the south to support the advance that Manstein was obtaining. Thus, they were able to help break through the 3rd Soviet defensive belt, and the 2nd Waffen-SS Panzer Corps was able to advance towards the city of Prokhorovka, where the final battle of Operation Citadel would be fought. During these days that go from the 10th to the 12th, the Luftwaffe again made some 5,500 sorties to give the best possible support to their land units, but to no avail. On the 12th, the Northern Clamp offensive was definitively cancelled, and more or less around the date it was also seen that it would be difficult to continue advancing in the south. From then on, the Luftwaffe's sortie steadily decreased until July 15, when the Citadel operation was definitively cancelled. Following the cancellation, the Luftwaffe was forced to attempt to maintain temporary air superiority to allow relief for German ground forces, which quickly had to be redeployed to meet the Soviet offensives. The final tally is as follows. The Germans, after having flown some 24,000 sorties throughout the battle, suffered some 240 planes shot down. The Soviets for their part made some 30,000 sorties and suffered 1,200 losses. Although the Germans had managed to prevail in the skies over the battlefield, they were unable to force ground units through the Soviet defenses. In addition, and as always happened to them, their casualties, both in material and in experienced pilots, could not be replaced at the same speed as the Soviet ones, and soon the Red Aviation regained air control. We must also indicate that the bombardments of Germany continue to intensify, so that more and more, the resources of the Luftwaffe were allocated to the Western Front. Well, up to here this program on this matter that usually goes so unnoticed, and how important it was in the development of the battle. If you want to delve into the ground operations of this German offensive in Kursk, I leave you in the description the live program that we have with Carlos Caballero Jurado and Juan Campos Ferreira, in which we analyze it extensively. We say goodbye here. Thank you all for being part of this community, and especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and we'll see each other here as always, next Wednesday and Sunday. See you soon.